In Wars of Oz, units have two formations. That's all that they're allowed to be in. So they can be in a column like this, or they can be in a line. And in general, the leader is always, let's do it this way with the flag in the middle. The leader of the regiment is always in the center front. Now when melee occurs, you move the leaders to the back so that the units can touch each other. But that's a line. Now this is also a line. So the rule says if you're more bases wide than you are deep, then it's a line. So a column then, I can set up my column like this. Right, with the leader up front, and again, if I get into a melee situation, we'll get the leaders out of the way so that the units can melee. But that's a column or line. So there's no, I don't know, weird wedge formation. There's no, denying the flank. It's a line or it's a column. Period. Now for artillery batteries, they are either limbered, so I would face the gun away from the enemy, like this. With the men lined up around it, the gunners, and again it's 5 bases, so I have each gunner counts as a base. If I spend the half a turn to unlimber, I would turn the gun around wherever it was and then deploy. Now when I turn the gun around, it can be facing in whatever direction I want it to face, but at that point it's unlimbered and it's deployed. And that's it. Those are your formations. So very simple. Designed to be very unambiguous. So I'm going to give a short example of how activation is conducted in Wars of Oz. If you're familiar with some of my other designs, you'll know about the double random activation, where you use a combination of dice and cards to determine the sequence. So I use the double random activation scheme in Wars of Oz, but with a twist. So the command radius for leaders, in this case this wizard is the leader of this quadling brigade, is 12 inches. So any units that are within 12 inches of him are considered to be in command radius. It doesn't have to be to the leader of the unit, it just has to be to the unit, to some part of the unit. So in this case, these two infantry units and this artillery battery are within command radius, but this one is not. So for those units that are not within command radius, I roll a 6-sided die and I place that next to the regimental commander. For those units that are within command radius, to include the leader himself, I roll all the dice and I just put them next to the commander. Then, and the other side does the same thing. Then we start drawing cards. So the first one comes up and it's a 3, and you'll note that the leader has 2 3s. So what he's going to do is he's going to assign those 3s from his dice pool, and then those units will activate. And I'm not going to do anything with them now because I'm going to have another little description of movement in a little bit. But this is right, and so then I flip the next card and it's a 5. So this unit over here that rolled a 5 would go. Then I would flip the next card and it's a 2. So the leader would say, well, I want to assign that to the artillery battery, and then they would activate. So the idea behind the dice pool is that the leader now has some control over when his units activate. Not complete control, there's still friction there, but he can decide the sequence in some sense. But those units that are out of command radius, they just go when they're good and ready to go. So I'm going to provide an example of how movement is conducted in Wars of Oz. So this is a quadling unit in column. Now in most cases, movement is based on rolling 2 10-sided dice and taking the higher of the 2 die rolls. In this case I got a 10 and an 8, so we'll discard the 8. Now on your unit record sheets there's customization based on different nationalities and also on the movement modifiers, right? So in this case it says quadling infantry gets to add 3 inches, so that's 10 plus 3 is 13, and there in column I get to add 3 more, that gives me a 16-inch move. All right, so 16 inches in column will take me, way up over here. So I'll move them like this, keep the regimental commander up front, and I move them up like this. Okay, so that's generally how movement is conducted. Now, if you want to change formation, what it says for quadlings is that, let me put them back where they started. What it says for quadlings is it takes half of their move to change formation. So again, I had a 16-inch move. If now what I wanted to do was change into line, right, it costs me half my movement speed to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move them 8 inches to here, right, and so they're at 8 inches, and then what I'm going to do is form line on the regimental commander. So I would go like this, right, and so it cost me half my movement speed to do that. Now, some people have asked, is there a means by which I have a unit in column and I want them to just form line by doing a right face? So no, that's not authorized in Wars of Ozz. But so if I wanted to change facing like that, what I would do is I would move and wheel. So let's say changing formation cost me half my move. So that gives me 8 inches left out of my 16-inch move. So I'll move 6 inches like this, right, and then take another couple of inches to wheel, because I measure how far the farthest base moves, right, and then what I'll do is I'll form line on the regimental commander at that point. So that's how wheeling is conducted. Alright, so now I'm going to give a quick example of how shooting works in Wars of Ozz. So casualties are taken, bases can take multiple casualties, but just going to let it run. Over here for a second, get the thing. Alright, so now I'm going to provide a quick example of how shooting works, just to give you an idea how that mechanic plays out in a Wars of Ozz game. So you take multiple casualties for a base. In general, it's 4 casualties to a base. That's reinforced by the idea that in most cases there are 4 figures on a base. But you fire by base. So we're going to have the quadlings fire at the munchkins. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure range. All of these are within 7 inches of the enemy. It could be that maybe this base would be slightly farther out and he would fire at long range versus short range. Units have a marksmanship number. In this case, their marksmanship number is a 6. Right, so I'm having to roll less than 6. That's less than, not less than or equal. So less than 6, 1 through 5, to get a hit. There are some modifiers here. In this case, I don't think any of them apply. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong chart. So targets in light cover, targets in heavy cover. The one does apply. So the targets in column. Oh, and notice, by the way, the range is measured from the unit to the unit, not the leaders. They don't count. But so the target's in column. So that makes me go from a 6 to a 7 for my marksmanship number. Right? And there are no other modifiers that apply. So I have 5 bases. I need less than 7 to get a hit. I roll. I get a 10. That's a miss. 2 8s, a 9, and I get 1 hit with a 1. So I put a marker on this unit. You can use whatever casualty caps you like. Now, the heart of the game actually is this notion of reaction tests. So there is a reaction test for being fired upon. So this unit now is going to have to make a reaction test. So I roll on the chart. I'm rolling, looking for my resolve number. Now in this case, the resolve number is a 5. So I roll a 10-sided die. 2 is less than resolve. Actually, it's less than half my resolve. So infantry return fire. Right, so I have 2 bases now of these infantry. Again, they're at short range. My marksmanship number for them is a 6. So I'm rolling 2 dice to get less than 6s. I get 1 hit. Now, this unit has now received fire, and it has to make a reaction test. Now, this is designed this way on purpose. When 2 units start to fire at each other, you can get this protracted firefight until one side decides to either not fire or to back up or something. So the key is that you received fire, not that you took casualties. But in this case, these guys took a casualty. They received fire. Roll a 7. Their resolve number is a 6. Right, so I'm trying to roll less than my resolve. I did not roll less than my resolve, so it says steady men, no fire. So the firefight ends because they're not allowed to shoot anymore. But this could go on for several turns, and there are modifiers to the reaction test. So for instance, if for some reason I had lost a base, that's a shift to the right on the chart. If I receive close range artillery fire, meaning canister, that's a shift to the right. If I'm attacked from the flank or rear, that's a shift to the right. If the brigade commander, for this army, that's the wizard, wherever the wizard went. If the brigade commander is attached, that gives you a plus to your reaction test. And if you're behind friendly lines, that gives you a plus. That's actually more for routing units. And then if you're in some kind of cover, woods or a town or whatever, then that gives you a shift to the left. But that's how reaction tests work. There's a reaction test for being fired upon. That one is the one that gets used the most during a game. There's also a reaction test for when you're receiving a charge. The other thing that's important is these charts are different. The results are different on the charts for the different nationalities. So for instance, Winkies, who tend not to have a lot of missile weapons, their response generally to being fired upon is to charge the enemy. But other nationalities have different responses. So again, these charts are tailored to the national differences for the different armies. Alright, now I'm going to show a quick example of melee. So this Munchkin unit activates and it decides it wants to charge at this Quadling unit. So he's going to figure out his movement distance. Munchkins are a 0 to their movement, so I roll 2 dice, and it's 7 and a 1, so I take the 7, right, plus 0. But I'm in column, so I get to add 3 more is 10, and I'm charging, makes me a 13. Well, look, I'm only 6 inches away, so clearly I can make contact here. So I'm going to get the leader out of the way and move these guys close. Now, the first thing that has to happen at that point, once I know that there's enough movement to get into contact, is the unit that's being charged has to make a reaction test. So this says infantry unit receives a charge. I roll a 10-sided die. It's a 5. Now my resolve for those guys is 5. I rolled a 5, so I'm in the greater than or equal to column. It says hasty fire, so I fire half as if long range, right? So now the other thing is that that base, I guess, yes, he can hit. Okay, so all 5 bases are going to get to fire. So I have 5 bases at short range, which would normally be a 7. I'm rolling for less than 7, right? My marksmanship number is a 6. I get 1, add 1 because I'm firing at the column, so that would be a 7. Wow, that ought to be a devastating volley. On the other hand, it said I'm firing halved, so I'm looking for less than 3.5, right? 9 is not less than 3.5. 8 is not less than 3, and 7 is not less than 4. I get 1 hit on this unit as it's charging. Now, normally, if we were just firing at each other, we would go into these guys doing a reaction test for having been fired on. Because they're charging, I don't do that. I go to this one that says, test of elan, a unit is trying to close with the enemy. Now, I haven't lost a base yet. My elan for those guys, pull up the Munchkins here, my elan for them is a 5. Right, for the Munchkin Lanver, so I roll a reaction test. I get an 8. That is not greater than my my elan, and so the result there says, not less than my elan. So the result says stop 4 inches short and fire. So they would stop here and fire a volley. But let's say, because I want to show you melee, that I rolled a 2. All right, so now they're gonna. It says close and melee. Alright, so we are actually going to have a fight. Now in this case, the rolls are simultaneous. I'm just going to do the Munchkins first because it was their charge. The Munchkins' melee number is a 4. So, how many bases count in the fight? So what the rules say is I get to count the bases in contact plus 1 base to the left, right, or rear. So in this case, this column gets these 2 bases plus these 2 bases. So they're going to get 4 bases in the fight. The Quadlings here, these 2 bases are going to fight, and this one. So the Quadlings are going to get 3 bases in the fight, not those. So I get 4 bases, so I'm going to roll 4 dice. I'm trying to roll less than my elan number. Now, my melee number. Now, what are the modifiers? Enemies defending an obstacle, they're not. Fighting uphill, we're not. The unit is disordered, not. Charging with impetus. So impetus means your last 4 inches of your charge move was in a straight line over open terrain, no hills, no obstacles or whatever. This was 4 inches, so these guys do get impetus. So they're going to go from a 4 to a 5. I'm not attacking the flank. I'm not attacking the rear. So I'm going 5 rolls, sorry, 4 rolls, looking for less than a 5. And I have 2 7s, a 1, and a 3, so I get 2 hits. So I still had these on here from the firing example. So let's say I had 2 hits already. I get 2 more hits, so I'm going to remove this base from the fight. So I can remove from whatever end I want. Obviously, as the quadlings, I want to remove from this side because I want to keep 3 bases in contact. All right, now the quadlings. Their melee number is much better than the Winkies. They're big old beefy farm boys, so they're a 7. They don't have any modifiers, so I get 3 dice. I'm looking for less than 7s. I roll the dice. I get a 6, a 7, and a 6, so I get 2 hits on the Munchkins. There's 1 hit on these guys, so I put 2 more hits on them. That is not a base loss. Now, both sides have to make a reaction test because they participated in a melee. So let's do the quadlings first because I have their card in my hand. It's a test of Elan. My Elan is a 6. I roll the die. That's 3. That's less than my Elan, so that's in this column. However, I've lost a base, so I'm going to go over 1. And this says, may occupy the enemy position or fight again. Okay, great. The Munchkins now, they haven't lost any bases yet. Their Elan number is a 5. I roll. It's a 1. So they get, so their result is charge ahead toward the nearest enemy. They're still in contact, so what that means is these 2 units are going to fight again. So I'm going to roll for the Munchkins. All right, so again, it's 4 dice because it's 4 bases. Their melee numbers are 4. We don't get the charging with Elan anymore because I'm not charging. We're now in the fight, so I have to roll less than 4. I roll 4 dice. I get 2 9s, a 6, and a 1. So 1 is a hit, so I'm going to mark a hit down here on this end. The quadlings now, remember their melee number was a 7, so I get 3 dice looking for less than 7s. I get 2 hits. Now that's going to eliminate a base and put 1 more on these guys. And again, we just participated in melee, so both sides are going to have to make a reaction test. I'll do the quadlings again because again I have the card in my hand. So I roll, looking for less than my Elan. It is not less than my Elan. It's on the greater than or equal to Elan table. But I also lost a base, so I shift 1 over to the right. I get moved backward 4 inches. 1, 2, and they're disordered. Right? Okay, these guys have to roll. The Munchkins, they roll a 3, which is less than their Elan. But they've lost a base, so we move that over. It says may occupy the enemy position or fight again, so they can decide if they want to stay where they are. We're going to let them occupy the position that was vacated by the quadlings. We'll put the leaders back out front because the melee is over, and that concludes the melee.